When a petrochemical plant loses its safety systems engineer, people don't just lose their jobs. People lose their lives. I knew that. I'd known it for 23 years. The new VP of operations apparently hadn't gotten that memo yet. I was sitting in my truck in the parking lot of Beaumont's Best Breakfast Diner, eating a sausage biscuit and reading the morning refinery incident reports the way most men my age read box scores. It was 6:15 in the morning. The sky over southeast Texas was doing that thing it does in October, going from black to orange to pink in about 12 minutes flat. The kind of sunrise that makes you forget for a second that you're parked next to a highway that smells like sulfur. My phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. It was my daughter calling to ask if I'd remembered her birthday dinner that Friday. I had. I told her I'd be there. She said good, because her mother would never let me hear the end of it if I wasn't. I drove to work. I'd been the senior safety systems engineer at Coastal Meridian Petrochemical for 23 years. Before that, I'd done 4 years at a refinery in Port Arthur that doesn't exist anymore. I understood pressure vessels the way a doctor understands a chest x-ray, not just what was in front of me, but what had been there before, what the scars meant, what had been patched, and why, and what would happen if you pushed the wrong thing at the wrong time. My department had 3 people, including me. We maintained the process safety management program for the entire facility, 600 acres of tanks, towers, heat exchangers, pipelines, and interconnected systems that, if mishandled, could level 3 city blocks. We managed the inspection schedules, the OSHA 1910.119 compliance filings, the management of change documentation, the pre-startup safety reviews, the emergency shutdown system certifications. None of that is dramatic language. That's just what the job was. The new VP of operations arrived in August. His name was Brandon. He was 38 years old, had an MBA from a school in the Northeast that he mentioned within the first 4 minutes of meeting him, and had spent the previous 6 years doing operational restructuring at consumer packaged goods companies, places that made dish soap and granola bars. He came in with a mandate from the executive team to cut operational overhead by 12% before the end of the fiscal year. Coastal Meridian's parent company, a mid-size Houston energy holding group, had been in quiet acquisition talks with a European energy conglomerate for several months. The deal was projected at around $310 million. Everyone knew it was coming. Nobody talked about it openly. People moved carefully, the way you move when a lot of money is on the table and you're not sure whose chair you're supposed to be sitting in. Brandon started doing what people like Brandon always do. He called it organizational right-sizing. He walked the facility with a clipboard and an assistant and asked department heads to justify their headcount. When he got to my department, he sat across from me in my office, a room that had exactly one window, a wall of binders, and a shelf of reference manuals going back to 1987. And he looked at my team of 3 and asked what we actually produced. I told him. He wrote something down. He came back 2 weeks later and told me he was going to consolidate my department's administrative functions into the general operations team and that my 2 engineers would be reassigned or separated. I would remain as a single-point resource. He framed it as a streamlining. He told me the functions I'd described could be distributed across existing competencies. I asked him if he understood what management of change documentation was. He said he had a general understanding. I asked him if he understood what happened when a pre-startup safety review wasn't completed before a process unit came back online after a turnaround. He told me he appreciated my perspective and that change was difficult for people who'd been in one place for a long time. I thanked him for his time. My 2 engineers, one of them had been with me for 11 years, the other for 6, were gone by the end of September. I sat with the 600-acre facility's entire process safety management burden on my desk, alone, and I did the math. The math was not encouraging. Brandon had saved the company $94,000 annually in salary and benefits. What he had done to the company's risk exposure was something else entirely. I spent 3 weeks documenting. Not because I was planning anything, because that's what I did. I documented everything. Every open inspection item, every overdue certification, every management of change that had been initiated but not closed, every pre-startup safety review that was scheduled for the next 6 months. I put it all in a transition binder, the kind I'd built 3 times before when staff turned over, the kind that assumed the person reading it knew what they were doing. I put it on the corner of my desk where it would be visible. Nobody asked about it. Then I wrote my resignation letter. I gave 30 days notice. I did not send a company-wide email. I did not ask for an exit interview. I did not talk to HR beyond what was required. I told my direct supervisor, who told Brandon, who apparently told the executive team. I was told through my supervisor that my timing was inconvenient. I acknowledged that. I said I understood the situation was difficult, and that I had prepared a comprehensive transition document for whoever would be taking over my responsibilities. My supervisor asked when that person would be identified. I said I assumed that was Brandon's area of responsibility. There was a pause. He said he'd pass that along. I worked my 30 days. I was thorough. I completed every task I'd started. I closed out every item I could close. I flagged in writing and email, with specific dates and regulatory citation numbers, the items that would need attention within 60, 90, and 180 days. I copied my supervisor on everything. I updated the documentation binder until it was current through my last day. I left it on the corner of my desk where it had always been. On my last Friday, I drove home in the same truck I'd driven to that diner on the morning Brandon first called me in. I stopped at a gas station and bought a bottle of water and a bag of sunflower seeds. I sat in the parking lot for a few minutes and watched the refineries on the horizon do what they always do: burn off the excess, flame and smoke, steady and indifferent. Then I drove home. My daughter had moved her birthday dinner to that Saturday because I'd told her I'd be finishing up at work. We went to a seafood place on the water in Galveston. Her husband ordered too much food, and we brought half of it home in boxes. On the drive back, she asked me what I was going to do next. I told her I had some options. She said she hoped one of those options involved sleeping past 5:30 in the morning. I told her I'd see what I could do. For about 6 weeks, I did very little. I fixed the fence in my backyard. I read 3 books I'd been meaning to read for 2 years. I called my brother in Midland. I took a long weekend in the hill country with my wife, the first time we'd done that without it being scheduled around a work emergency, in longer than I could remember. She said I seemed different. I asked her what she meant. She said I seemed present. I thought about that for a while. Meanwhile, at Coastal Meridian, the acquisition process was moving forward. The European firm, a Dutch energy conglomerate with operations across 12 countries, had sent its due diligence team to Houston in November. The team included financial analysts, legal counsel, and 2 engineers from their regulatory compliance division. One of them was a man named Peter, who had been doing industrial safety audits for over 25 years, and who, by all accounts, was methodical to the point of being unpleasant about it. I learned what happened next from my former supervisor, who called me on a Tuesday morning in early December. He started the call by asking how I was doing. I told him I was fine. He asked if I'd had time to think about any consulting work. I said I was open to conversations. Then he told me about the meeting. The due diligence team had been given access to Coastal Meridian's regulatory documentation as part of the acquisition review. Peter had been working through the process safety management files. He had found 11 open inspection items that were past their regulatory completion dates. He had found 4 management of change records that had been initiated but never formally closed, meaning process changes had been made to live systems without completing the required safety review cycle. He had found 2 pre-startup safety reviews that had been completed and signed, but by personnel who were not certified to sign them under OSHA 1910.119 requirements, a detail that anyone with my background would have caught, and that apparently no one else had. He had also found my name on approximately 300 documents, filings, certifications, reviews, authorizations going back over 2 decades. And he had found that my name appeared on exactly 0 documents dated after October. In the meeting where he presented his findings to the Coastal Meridian executive team and the acquisition representatives, Peter had set his folder on the table. My supervisor described it as not quite a slam, but the kind of placement that gets a room's attention, and he had asked a single question. Who is this Walter Reed, and why isn't he here? The room was quiet for a moment. My former CEO, a man I'd briefed on safety metrics every quarter for over a decade, looked at Brandon. Brandon explained that I had departed the company as part of an organizational restructuring. Peter asked who had replaced me. Brandon said the functions had been distributed. Peter asked him what that meant, specifically in the context of the 4 unclosed management of change records. Brandon said he'd need to look into the specifics. Peter asked about the 2 improperly signed pre-startup safety reviews. Brandon said he believed those had been handled through an alternative process. Peter asked what alternative process, and whether that process was documented. Brandon said he would follow up. Peter then told the room that his firm could not recommend proceeding with an acquisition of a facility that had 11 overdue inspection items, 4 unclosed management of change records, and 2 process units that had been restarted without valid safety reviews, by a company that had eliminated its sole process safety management engineer 6 weeks before a scheduled regulatory review period. He said it in the way that Europeans sometimes deliver bad news, not loudly, but completely, like a door closing. The $310 million deal was suspended pending a full regulatory remediation audit. My supervisor called me from the parking lot after that meeting. He talked for about 4 minutes. I let him finish. Then I asked him what specifically he was calling to ask me. He said the executive team wanted to know if I would be willing to come back in a consulting capacity to manage the remediation process. I asked him what the timeline looked like. He said Peter's team had given them 90 days to demonstrate meaningful progress before they would issue a final recommendation on whether to re-engage the acquisition discussions. I asked him to have someone send me the list of open items and the scope of what they needed remediated. He sent it that afternoon. I looked at it. It was, as I had expected, entirely manageable for someone who knew the facility, knew the documentation history, knew the inspection schedules, knew which contractors held the relevant certifications. For someone who didn't know those things, it would have taken months just to understand what they were looking at. I wrote a proposal. I sent it back. My daily consulting rate was more than 3 times what I had been earning as a salaried employee. I outlined the scope, the timeline, the deliverables, and a clause specifying that I retained the right to decline any item I determined was being addressed in a manner inconsistent with regulatory requirements. I was not going to put my name back on documents that weren't right. They signed it within 48 hours. I drove back to the facility on a Wednesday morning in December. The parking lot looked the same. The refineries on the horizon looked the same. I got my visitor badge from the front desk because I was a visitor now, and I walked to what used to be my office. It had been partially converted into a storage space for office supplies. My transition binder was still on the corner of the desk, exactly where I'd left it. Nobody had moved it. I picked it up, blew the dust off the cover, and sat down. The work was familiar. That's the only word for it. I knew every piece of equipment in those 600 acres. I knew the inspection history on tanks that had been in service since before some of the current employees were born. I knew which valve had been problematic in 2014 and what the fix had been and why the fix had required a specific documentation sequence. That knowledge doesn't live in a binder or a database. It lives in the person who did the work, year after year, until it becomes something close to instinct. I worked methodically. I closed the management of change records one at a time, properly, in the sequence they required. I coordinated the overdue inspections with the certified contractors I'd worked with for years, people who knew me and picked up when I called. I reviewed the 2 improperly authorized pre-startup safety reviews, documented the corrective action, and filed the amended certifications with the appropriate regulatory authority. I rebuilt the inspection schedule for the next 18 months and cross-referenced it against the facility's planned maintenance calendar. Peter's team came back in March for their follow-up review. I was present for it. We went through the documentation together, line by line, the way people who take this kind of work seriously tend to do things. He was methodical. I was methodical. We got along fine. At the end of the second day, he looked up from the last folder and said the remediation had been conducted to standard. He said it in the same flat, complete way he delivered the bad news 4 months earlier. Just a fact, nothing more. The acquisition discussions reopened 2 weeks after that. The deal closed in May at $322 million, the original figure, plus some additional asset valuations that had been updated during the extended review period. I read about it in the Houston Business Journal. I was not at Coastal Meridian when it closed. My consulting contract had ended in April, as scoped. I had done the work, documented everything, transitioned the open items to a new 3-person safety team that the company had quietly rebuilt over the winter, this time with proper titles, proper reporting lines, and a budget that reflected what the function actually required. On my last day of the consulting engagement, I left a new transition binder on the corner of what was now the new team's office, updated through that morning. Every item current. I heard through my former supervisor that Brandon had moved on to a different role sometime in January, something in consumer products, I think. I didn't ask for details. That evening, I drove out to the refinery overlook on the west side of Beaumont, a spot I'd gone to sometimes over the years when a day had been particularly long or particularly strange. I sat on the hood of my truck and watched the flare stacks do their work against the night sky, orange and steady, the way they'd been doing it long before I showed up, and the way they'd keep doing it long after I was gone. My phone buzzed. It was my daughter. She asked how the last day had gone. I told her it had gone fine. She asked what was next. I told her I had a few conversations lined up, a refinery in Louisiana, a chemical terminal outside of Corpus, a firm that did safety audits for insurance underwriters. She said it sounded like I wasn't going to be sleeping past 5:30 after all. I told her probably not. She laughed. She said she'd told her husband that her father was the kind of man who couldn't be replaced, just temporarily misplaced. I thought that was a better line than anything I would have come up with. The flares kept burning. The sky kept doing its thing. A man who knows why the tank was built that way, who signed the inspection in 2009, who knows which line runs under the North Corridor, and what pressure it was rated for before the 2016 modification. That man doesn't become obsolete. He becomes necessary again. The only question is the cost of the lesson. In this case, the cost was approximately $38 million in deal delays, remediation fees, consultant invoices, and regulatory penalties, and $94,000 saved. That math will never stop being remarkable.
Some days feel off, like I'm standing but still falling. A little pain, a little tired, and no one to tell it all to. There are days that feel unsteady, like I'm drifting out of place. Every step just feels so heavy, with a smile I have to fake. A little hurt I keep inside me, a little weight I always hide, and 1,000 quiet worries I've been holding deep inside. There's no one here to tell it to, no one who would understand. So I carry all these feelings like they're slipping through my hands. A little broken, little lost, trying hard to just get through. All these nights I stay awake with everything I never say to you. I keep walking through the silence like it's all I've ever known. Every crowded room reminds me how it feels to be alone. There's no one here to tell it to, no one who would understand. So I carry all these feelings like they're slipping through my hands. A little broken, little lost, trying hard to just get through. All these nights I stay awake with everything I never say to you. Maybe one day I'll be stronger, maybe I'll learn how to speak, but for now I keep it buried in the parts of me too weak. There's no one here to tell it to, no one who would understand. So I carry all these feelings like they're slipping through my hands. A little broken, little lost, trying hard to just get through. All these nights I stay awake with everything I never say to you. Don't pity me. My heart doesn't need your mercy. I can still stand on my own. I was broken by your leaving, fell deeper than I thought I would, but Pain has taught me how to heal now and survive what once I couldn't. You don't have to look back sadly, don't reach out with guilty hands. What you shattered made me stronger. Now I rise where I once collapsed. My heart doesn't need your pity, not another empty sign. I've got enough strength left within me to rebuild this life of mine. My feet are steady through the sorrow, I can stand through all the pain. You don't have to save me, darling, I'll learn to breathe again. I once begged for your affection, now I've learned my worth in scars. And the man you left in pieces found his own way through the dark. My heart doesn't need your pity, not another empty sign. I've got enough strength left within me to rebuild this life of mine. My feet are steady through the sorrow, I can stand through all the pain. You don't have to save me, darling, I'll learn to breathe again. Begun. My heart doesn't need your pity, not another empty sign. I've got enough strength left within me to rebuild this life of mine. My feet are steady through the sorrow, I can stand through all the pain. You don't have to save me, darling, I'll rise alone again. I'll rise alone